All right, let's now bring in Sophie Mokoena. She's the SABC's international news editor and deputy chairperson for Foreign Press Association of Africa to weigh in on this matter. Sophie, particularly on Al Jazeera. Good afternoon to you. Of course, you know, we've just commemorated or celebrated Freedom Press Day, World Freedom Press Day, and we've heard, you know, the utterances made by the UN's Secretary General on the sacrosanct, how the media role is sacrosanct to what it does. How is this news particularly being viewed, and at this time where this crucial war is ongoing in the Middle East?
I think when you listen to what Sarah said, the issue of Israel claiming that they are the only strong democracy in the Middle East, it has thrown that out of the window, because if you are a strong democracy in that region, one of the pillars in relation to democracy, it is media, and that is why media is playing a critical role worldwide, and that is why the Secretary General of the United Nations issued a statement on that day last week, because media does play a very important role to disseminate information so that citizens of the world can make their own decisions based on proper and clear, unbiased, independent information. And therefore, if you stifle that kind of debate in relation to media freedom, you become one of those despots. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu, like any despot around the world, particularly in relation to how they handle media, he is part of those leaders on global scale who are not respecting media freedom, and therefore this is very bad. But also it is very challenging for media globally, because as media we are almost like a family in terms of looking who's doing what, when, where you are able to pick up stories and follow up, but also you have an overview of the situation. I'll make an example of SABC. SABC has got a very strong following on the continent, but also globally, particularly in the Middle East online, because people are saying the way we cover global issues, we have a different perspective. So they are able to judge us and view us and assess us against our peers. And they are then able to get an overview of the picture of what's happening globally based on what they see on CNN, on BBC, on Al Jazeera and us. And therefore, if you remove one of these broadcasters in a very strategic position like Jerusalem, which is a contested region or area, you are saying people shouldn't know what's happening there. And therefore, even in Israel, you are saying you only want coverage that will be in supportive of what you are doing. Even the whole move does affect even other media houses, because then a question arises why others were not banned. And that speaks to targeting of those who don't necessarily subscribe to your viewpoint.
I'm glad you mentioned, of course, the role of the media, especially as we look at this being an election year for several countries. But just going back, you know, to that point in terms of the implications, I want you to zone in specifically for Al Jazeera. I mean, what we're hearing now from the Prime Minister is that he is saying that Israel, I mean, he's basically saying that this is an incitement channel. And of course, we've heard from Al Jazeera saying that the utterances and the ban pose a greater risk on the journalists themselves, you know, from the Al Jazeera. We saw, of course, that this war alone, over 100 journalists were killed, you know, doing their work in the line of duty.
Well, the issue of saying broadcasters or journalists are inciting violence, that's what despots do or say when they want to stifle flow of information and the picture in their respective countries, when they want to censor, particularly the visuals, because you can just beam the visuals and keep quiet. People will see what's happening there. And therefore, it is a trend when despots are stifling information, fearing that the whole world will see what's happening and make informed decisions in terms of what's happening in that particular area. They will always talk about inciting violence. If they have an issue why not contact the media house, speak to the senior editorial team, because media houses have regulatory frameworks in terms of ensuring that the coverage is fair and balanced and independent. And therefore that doesn't even hold water in terms of using that argument. Secondly, you are saying you want people who can just report what you want to hear, and it can't work that way. No one is saying media is immune from criticism.
Yeah.
We are human beings. We can err, and you can take us to task, but don't stifle the flow of information.
I mean, very quickly, Sophie, as we have to wrap, but what does this then look like for Israel? I mean, we've seen that country has received so much criticism globally. We see what's happening in the US with those, campus protests in various universities. We're seeing, of course, now these talks being deemed, just a show for Israel, and that they're not really genuine. In fact, we obviously see now that a lot of Israelis are being Gazans are being evacuated from Rafah, their only refuge spot. I mean, what does this then mean from a global perspective for Israel and the Prime Minister?
The global north, the allies of Israel, must take full responsibility in terms of how Israel has behaved, because they've been pumping resources in their practical action, in supply of arms and resources, that's the dollars, but also what they say in public, constantly reminding the world that they support Israel, not condemning what has happened, but standing firm behind Israel. And therefore Israel, I see Israel being a child in the family, where everybody is protecting the wrong things that have happened in the family because of this child. And therefore, the world must take responsibility. For me, as someone who has followed this story since it started last year in October, I think the international community has failed people in Gaza. They have also failed people in Israel, because you still have those members of different families who are being held hostage by Hamas. And as the world is contesting its political might and military might, it's ordinary people who have been suffering both sides. Yeah. And therefore the international community has completely failed people in Palestine and also in Israel. And I think it's an indictment on the leadership we have around the world at this moment.
All right, Sophie, thank you so much, of course, for that update. And of course, speaking there as the international news editor of the SABC, as well as the deputy chairperson for Foreign Press Association, Sophie Mokoena, just weighing in there on what is happening in the Middle East in as far as the media is concerned.